R. Blank, welcome to the Biohacking Secrets Show.
Thank you so much, Anthony. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for having me.
And my pleasure as well. I'm excited for our conversation today. We're going to talk about the fifth generation of electronic devices, particularly wireless devices, and the biological and psychological impact that they have in our life. But we'll probably focus mostly on the biology of it. And most importantly, I think a lot of people feel an immense amount of frustration and learned helplessness around this topic, where they're just like, they just want to throw their hands up and, oh, what am I supposed to do? That's everywhere. You know what I mean? Or what can we do about it? They're still putting the Eye of Sauron towers everywhere, no matter what. You know, you've got eminent domain and all sorts of things. So I'd like us to also really give some actionable steps that people can take, and kind of, if they're in that learned helplessness phase of the journey, kind of move into a more informed and empowered place. So
excellent.
Before we do that,
I like that goal a lot.
Yeah, for sure. Let's start with a bit of your background and origin story. I know that your father, Dr. Martin Blank, was very involved in this space as well. So for our listeners that aren't familiar with your work, let us know who you are, what you're about, what brought you here.
Sure. Well, I used to be, and I guess in a past life, I was a software engineer in Los Angeles, and I was teaching on the faculty of University of Southern California, Viterbi School of Engineering. And as you mentioned, my father was Dr. Martin Blank, who was a very significant contributor to the field of research into EMF and health effects. And it was about 2012. He had a contract to write a book, and he was a very good writer. But this book, unlike most of his experience, was really aimed at normal people, trying to educate normal people as to all the things that he had learned about EMF and health effects, what the science really showed in his career, which his career was quite long. His involvement in EMF in particular was over 3 decades. So he asked me for some help to write this book, because again, it was intended to reach, like I said, regular people. So I hopped in and I started writing what became Overpowered with him. And in the course of writing that book, I had a few really stunning realizations. It just really hit home.
Which is a great book, by the way. I've got it on my bookshelf.
Oh, thank you very much. Sorry
to cut you off, guys. If you don't have Overpowered, pick it up.
Thank you. Yeah. So I obviously, he was my father, so I grew up around him, and I kind of knew about this stuff. And that's why we never had a microwave oven. It's why I didn't get a cell phone until, pretty late. And when I did, I knew never to hold it up against my head. But writing this book really hit home a few things. One is that the science showing that these forces are effectively toxic, that they impact human biology and the biology of all living things. It is very, very strong science, because when you hear it covered, often you'll hear like there's some debate, or that's a big question, or we need more research. And certainly we need more research, but really the science, we're talking about thousands of high quality studies into this question. So it is much better researched and more conclusive than many people are led to believe. But then when you step back and think about it, right, this stuff comes from everything that defines us as a modern society, right? To actually get rid of EMF as a toxic force in our world, we'd have to go back effectively to 1850, not only giving up cell phones, but giving up light bulbs and refrigerators, right? You just can't get rid of this stuff. It's completely impractical to do that. So I realized there had to be healthier and safer ways for people to engage with technology. And that's where the idea for what became Shield Your Body came from. So that's how I went from being a software engineer to running Shield Your Body.
I love it. And I'm excited because more people are recognizing this stuff and talking about it now. And whereas, like, if I talked about it in the 2016 to 2018 range, I think it was very much seen as almost an unwelcome and annoying topic for most people. They're like, all right, just give me other biohacks. I don't want to deal with that. Like, all right, what else can I do? But now, I'm one of my friends is currently on a nature retreat trip where she's in an area with like low or no cell phone reception, no connectivity. And she's sending me pictures of her doing yoga outside in nature. And she's like, oh my gosh, I'm having so much fun. I love this. Like, I didn't realize how much of a difference I could feel getting outside of Chicago and in nature.
Yeah.
And the tide is really starting to turn. So, I mean, I'm of the belief, like, we don't have Wi-Fi in either of our homes. My phone's in airplane mode most of the day. We got our smart meters removed from, one house, and we're working on the other one because they just went and put it on without our permission. But we do have like literally lead shielding behind it, directing it away from the house so it won't go in. This is also not, I'm sharing that because this isn't just a nice word salad. This is something I believe in so much and have seen so much compelling research, both in the scientific literature and the real world, that this impacts our biology and the way that we sleep and the way that we recover and how quickly we age, that I consider it one of the most important biohacks that we can implement if we're interested in maximizing longevity and optimizing our physical and mental performance.
Yeah, and it's also one of the easiest to really make a big difference in. So, yeah.
For sure, you do it once, and then you're pretty much set up, and then you tweak a couple habits. Like, you get rid of your smart meter, you go from Wi-Fi to a fiber optic connection, and getting a router or a modem. I get those switched up, but one that's not transmitting, and you're done. And you have a faster internet connection. You're sleeping better. Your biology doesn't have this constant chronic stressor that throws off everything. But I think where people kind of have a tough time is because we've also got big telecom involved here, and they're clearly rolling out infrastructure that requires people remain ignorant to the health effects of this technology. And so you'll hear a lot of people say, oh, there's no evidence to support that, or they'll use sound bites like, yeah, but don't you know it's non-thermal? It's non-thermal, so it's not bad for you, And these sound bites that they've clearly been spoon-fed, but are almost nonsense when it comes to what's really going on at the cellular level. So my question here is, let's say you're in a court of law and you need to prove that this technology is bad for you. What are the foundational studies that you go to and pull from that in a court of law could turn things in your favor?
Sure. Oh, that's a really good question. And my father would have been fantastic to answer that, because he did actually testify and present to parliaments in Canada and in Europe. But so when I talk, because I don't testify, but when I talk and I try to explain these issues to people. So first of all, incontrovertibly, the World Health Organization designates this as a Class 2B carcinogen. That means back in 2011, they determined that there was a sufficient basis in science to consider this a possible carcinogen. Now, there's lots of other types of damage, right? That's specifically about carcinogeneity, of the cancer-causing ability.
Nice word.
But even the World Health Organization 11 years ago came to that conclusion, and there's a lot of move to actually get them to promote from 2B to 2A or 1. But getting to the science, right? One of the studies I talk about most frequently, and we talked about in Overpowered, was actually a couple of studies done in the 90s by doctors Henry Lai and Narendra Singh. And they showed, at the time they were studying cordless phones, not cell phones, because this was the 90s, but they showed even brief exposures to cordless phone radiation, which is very similar to cell phone radiation, led to significant notable increases in strand breaks, DNA strand breaks. So what does that mean? DNA is made up of two strands, right? And a strand break means that one or both of those strands has broken. Now, if one of those strands, well, let's actually start. If both of those strands break, the cell will kill itself. It'll engage in apoptosis, process of cell death. And it sounds bad, but believe it or not, that's the preferred outcome. Because if only one strand breaks, the cell has mechanisms, right? That's one of the reasons you have two strands, is you can actually reverse engineer the broken strand from the still intact strand. And it's in the process of doing that where mutations can occur in the DNA. And mutations are a primary mechanism through which disease manifests in the body. So that is one, and that is not only a very significant finding, it's one that has been repeated. It's peer reviewed and repeated many, many, many times since then.
And you said that is Henry Lai and who?
Narendra Singh, S-I-N-G-H. So it's L-A-I and S-I-N-G-H.
Good, just so people could find
so
that.
That is, I believe, one of the most compelling pieces of information that comes out of a lab regarding this stuff. Now, that's lab science. Now, lab science is very important, right? Because it can answer very specific questions and it's easily repeatable. So you can have another group try to repeat it somewhere else. And if they do, well, that strengthens the findings. But lab science doesn't answer questions like, does it cause cancer, right? Because you can't just stick a person, or rather 10 people or 20 people or 30 people in a lab for 10 years and 20 years and 30 years and give half of them a cell phone and the other half don't and see which ones get cancer. It's super impractical, but also incredibly immoral to do that. And so you can't answer those bigger questions about disease in a lab. To answer those bigger questions, you turn to a form of science called epidemiology, where you study the incidence of disease in human populations. And there is a very significant study published in by a researcher named Leif Salford, and he did a very large scale study of cell phone use, and that was in 2007, and that actually had a lot of findings in it, but it was a really big study, which is why when it comes to epidemiology, you want as large a subject set as possible to get as valid a set of findings as you can. And it had a lot of different findings. But for instance, one of them is those who began using cordless or cell phones before the age of 20 had a 400% increased risk of forming a brain tumor on the side of the head where they carried their phone. So again, that researcher was Leif Salford, Leif Salford. And that's also both the Lai Singh and the Salford studies are referenced in Overpowered. And for the purposes of answering this question, I'll give you one more. And this is by a Dr. Sam Millam, who published a book not too long ago, maybe 12, 13, 14 years ago, and it's called Dirty Electricity. And it's a really significant book, and he did a lot of really important work. And what he did is he went around, and again, another epidemiologist, and what he did is he went around the country, the United States, and he measured and investigated death records before and after the introduction of the electrical grid in a given area, right? Because in the United States, the process of electrification took time. It's not like you snapped and the whole country had power. The power grid was deployed to different places at different times. And what he found was that there was a whole set of what he calls the diseases of civilization, which include things like ALS, as well as childhood leukemia, right? And before the introduction, I should say ALS is Lou Gehrig's disease. Before the introduction of electrification, these diseases did not exist, right? So, for instance, when it comes to childhood leukemia, that's the incidence of leukemia in children between the ages of 3 and 4. That did not happen until the power grid was introduced into an area. And then you started to see children dying from childhood leukemia. And there's a number of these diseases of civilization that he identified. And in area after area around the country, you found that these diseases of civilization did not exist. And then they introduced the grid, and then they do exist. And further, they still don't exist in areas that didn't get electrified. So that would include, for instance, Amish populations. So those are three answers to your question.
In the Amish populations?
That's correct, and they still don't.
Fascinating. Great answer.
So, but you could go on and on with an answer to that question. But those are three really powerful Two are actually studies, and then one is a book which includes research.
Yeah, it's very helpful. And I do think that we're probably going to see a lot of legislation around this in the coming years and decades, as more and more people are like, get this out of my town, get this away from my home. It's sort of equivalent to,
one thing your listeners might actually be interested in. While the big companies that we're talking about publicly will say one thing, on the other side, there are multiple large-scale insurance underwriters that are refusing to provide insurance to cell phone manufacturers against future health claims. So that includes the Swiss Re and AM Best, the leading underwriter for Lloyd's of London, right? So multiple, and these are big, legitimate insurance underwriters. This isn't like Bob's underwriting. This is serious stuff. And they are refusing to write policies to insure cell phone companies against future health claims because they know what is going to come. Even as the companies themselves are mouthing different words.
Yeah, I mean, that is a huge piece of evidence right there. So that's Swiss Re and then AM Best, who are underwriters
AM
for
Best.
Lloyd's.
Yes.
Lloyd's of London. Okay, lovely. Thank you.
One of those is underwriter for Lloyd's of London, but they're underwriters for multiple firms.
Awesome. And then there's also the Ramazzini study, I believe, that out of Italy, that was a fairly large, also I believe epidemiological study. If people wanted to look that up, it's Ramazzini, which is, I believe, the world's largest study on cell tower radiation and its connection to cancer.
Okay, I'll have to. I haven't heard of that one. I'll have to look that up. But since you mentioned Italy, another fact that your listeners might be interested in is that it's actually legal precedent in Italy that cell phones cause brain tumors. So it has been ruled by multiple courts in Italy. So it is, like I say, it is now legal precedent that cell phones cause brain tumors. That all came from a guy's case. He'd claimed disability he wanted to get disability reimbursements and payments because he claimed that the cell phone that he had to carry for work had caused his brain tumor. And again, multiple courts found in his favor.
How often, do you have any idea how often precedents like that can be carried over between differing nations? Like the finding in Italy could be used in the United States, piggybacked off of?
I don't.
No.
Yeah, I mean, laws in one country don't impact laws in another, but I know they can influence in certain proceedings. Certainly, it would have impact within the EU more than it would in North America.
That makes sense. I was actually doing an interview the other day, and it was on blood sugar, but I pulled up a fascinating study from 2008 called Dirty Electricity Elevates Blood Sugar Among Electrically Sensitive Diabetics and May Explain Brittle Diabetes. And just a quick quote from that. Based on estimates of people who suffer from the symptoms of electrical hypersensitivity, which they put around, they say 3 to 35%. I think it's much more than that. And I'm not even quite so sure about that term itself, but he says as many as up to 60 million diabetics worldwide may be affected. Exposure to electromagnetic pollution in its various forms may account for higher plasma glucose levels, higher blood sugar levels, and may contribute to the misdiagnosis of diabetes. So we're not just talking about cancer here. We're talking about many of these chronic and degenerative diseases that are plaguing our culture, and that people are, food plays a part, exercise plays a part. But if you're not looking at your electromagnetic environment, if you're living in a high rise in a city, you're going to be exposed to much different levels of this electromagnetic pollution than someone who's living in nature in the country and maybe has off-grid power.
Yeah, totally.
Meaning they're not hooked up to the power grid, and they don't have the associated smart meter on their home.
Yeah, well, you brought you just touched on about 8 different things, each of which I could talk about for a while. But let me step into at least one of them, which is, I think it was really important what you said, right? Because cancer gets a lot of the attention for obvious reasons. It's terrifying. And we have no cure, really, in almost every instance. It doesn't mean it's lethal in every instance, but we have no cure. And but what people need to realize is that cancer is just one of the sets of negative health outcomes that have been linked strongly from science to EMF exposure, right? So you have obviously brain tumors, but it's not just brain tumors. You have thyroid cancer, prostate cancer, colorectal cancer, breast cancer. These are all forms, multiple different types of forms of cancer. I already mentioned leukemia, different types of cancer that are linked to EMF exposure. But it goes beyond that, right? You have a disruption with the endocrine system. So one of the ones I talk about a lot is the science showing that EMF exposure suppresses melatonin production in your body.
That's huge.
Which then leads to, poorer sleep, which then it becomes this vicious cycle where you don't even need to have damage from EMF. You could have damage from any number of other different toxins in your life. And if you're not getting good sleep, your body isn't recovering and healing properly from those exposures. You have studies pointing to increased rates of anxiety among people, again, linked to EMF exposure. What the science shows is that in almost every system where you investigate the question, there are negative health outcomes stemming from EMF exposure. EMF does not impact just a single system. It impacts multiple different systems. It doesn't impact everyone the same way, in part because everyone's exposures are quite different, but also because everyone's physiologies are quite different. And they might be exposed to any number of other different types of toxins in their life that are different from the ones that you and I are exposed to. So the way the damage is manifest will be different from person to person. But really, when you look at any biological system, you see negative health consequences from these exposures. And I would just throw in at the end there, it's not just in humans. You see negative health outcomes throughout the animal kingdom and throughout the plant kingdom, where, trees and plants, they can't grow when they're in the presence of high levels of EMF. Birds, their navigational capabilities are thrown off by EMF. Anything that relies on magnetoception for navigation.
Sea turtles.
You have with bees, sea turtles is another one. With bees, there's a very colorful, or how shall I say, powerful study where when you put a cell phone in front of a hive, the hive never comes home and dies, right? You see these impacts throughout all living things. And I know if someone's a skeptic hearing what I just said, they'll say, that's not possible, that's crazy. But EMF, all forms of life depend on EMF, right? Our brains communicate to our body and control our body using EMF signals. Our body communicates itself back to the brain using EMF signals. I mentioned the Lion Singh research into DNA integrity. All living cells share DNA. So if this force has the ability to harm DNA in that way, again, it should not be a surprise that you can see damage manifest in every system in your body, because all of these systems are based on cells that have DNA, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Because people these days, especially in the biohacking space, are increasingly interested in knowing their biological age, not necessarily their chronological age, like how many years they've spent on this planet, but how old they are at the cellular level. And we've seen telomere testing. So telomeres being like those end caps on our DNA that come off each time DNA replicate. We're seeing telomere testing being used a lot as a proxy for one's biological age, meaning like the shorter your telomeres are, the older you are biologically. Can you elaborate on how these double-stranded DNA breaks resulting from wireless electricity or EMF, however you want to put it, impact the length of telomeres?
So that is outside of my area of knowledge. I will just say, once a cell engages in apoptosis, it dies. So at that point, it's not replicating any longer. And so however long the telomeres were at the end of its life, that wouldn't impact anything else in the body.
For sure. I had a situation in late 2019 where I had a home in Florida. Before I even engaged in a deal there, I did pretty significant testing with an EMF specialist. We checked, wireless radiation. We checked electrical radiation. We checked magnetic radiation. There were some power lines by the property, but they were relatively weak. We checked how well the home would ground, and allow my body to disperse the voltage from electricity. Mm-hmm. And I woke up one morning and the city of Delray Beach was installing the highest voltage power lines allowed by the city on my property. They were taking the old ones down and putting the new ones up. Then the measurements for magnetic radiation were coming into my office, into my living room, into my bedroom. It basically was like if I owned oceanfront property, a smaller body of water is probably even more relevant. And like a chemical company came and dumped a bunch of chemicals that were now like washing up on my beach. You know what I mean? And I dug into it, talked to a few friends and experts, and they basically said your best option's to move. Like you can't really effectively shield from the power lines, and I would just get out of there. So I had to, along with some stuff that my family was going through, my dad having Parkinson's, I had to take a bath on that property because there was nothing I could do about it. So there's a part of me that's thinking in the future, let's say I get property somewhere because it's far away from the Eye of Sauron towers that they're putting up everywhere as part of the infrastructure for this wireless digital surveillance and control grid. If someone were to put up one of those things near my property, I don't want to go through the same issue. We're like, oh, I guess you got to move again. Right. So that's part of the reason that I'm asking about some of these studies and things that have already shown and proven the dangers of this. But like, what would you do in that situation? Let's say you bought like a nice piece of land where the frequencies were good. You were excited about it. And then they put a tower right on the border of your property.
Yeah. So I'll answer that. But before I do, I'll just say there's, given what you just explained to me, there is a website I would recommend that you check out. And it is called Scientists for Wired Tech. So scientists, then the number 4, and then wiredtech.com. And it's run by this fellow out of California who's had quite a lot of experience engaging in this type of regulatory appeal and reform. And he has a lot about what science he cites, what legislation he cites, and so on and so forth. So that will be a really good site for you.
Awesome.
For me, I would sell and move. If the electromagnetic exposure profile of my home got to a point where I was no longer comfortable living there. Because, well, I'm very comfortable living in kind of rural spots. I mean, I don't know how many people are watching, but you can see out my back window. I don't live in a city. So
yeah, it looks like paradise. You got like some. Where are you at? You look like you got some palm-esque trees, and
Yeah. No, I'm actually in Panama.
Oh, nice. Awesome.
But it also relates to what you were saying earlier, which is it is hard. Particularly with certain types, like if you're talking about a cell tower, that's one thing. But if you're talking about super high magnetic field emissions off of a new power line, that is really hard to shield against. Yeah. And it would just be easier to find a different place. And then also engaging with the type of battle you're talking about is a very long, draining process. Now, I certainly don't discourage people from doing it. And there's websites like I just told you that are set up that with lots of great information. And I encourage people to become fluent in this language and to engage in this type of work. But personally, I would just want my home to be a calm place. And so that is how I, personally would approach it. But those types of particularly in the United States, those types of victories, they are possible, but they take a long time and a lot of energy and effort.
Yeah. which I think is lends itself to us figuring out a way for people to band together and pool resources and not try to do this like, 1,000 different times in different counties all over, but, do it right just a few times and then be able to have that precedence that then you can lean on. And so it's replicable for our fellow men and women, So I think I'm just planting these seeds because it's I want us to be thinking about that and moving strategically as things continue to unfold, because they are moving at a quick pace. And what you described too, it shows the importance of being mobile. There's a lot of people now that are getting they're converting Sprinter vans and, getting RVs and that sort of thing. Like one of my friends out in California just got one where worst case scenario, you can pick up and move, and until we kind of see where the dust settles and where these things are all going to be. And then there's also ways, when you get a lot of the tech out of your home, and we're going to talk about some of the strategies and ways to shield yourself. But you can, once you've kind of done that, you can also shield your home. Like I know hardy board, which is a form of concrete, is relatively reflective. You can get metal roofs that are relatively reflective, which become increasingly important with like these satellites, the Elon Musk satellites that they're putting everywhere, and all these other companies that are causing this electrification from space. So, this is really great.
Yeah,
Some of the resources
for anyone
shared,
interested for anyone interested in whole home shielding or large, maybe not whole home, but significant parts of your home, I strongly encourage engaging the services of an expert, such as a building biologist with an EMF specialization. They call it an EMRS. These people are trained, certified by the Building Biology Institute, and they are trained in this type of mitigation. Because if you try to do it yourself, first off, just be aware it's very generally quite expensive, and which is fine, except it's then also easy to get wrong. And you won't even necessarily know you got it wrong unless you have the tools to measure and diagnose. And then you'll have to rework it. So that's why I strongly recommend people engage the services of one of those types of specialists in advance to help plan that type of large scale shielding implementation.
Yeah, and we'll get that link and share it as well. There's also a company called Shielded Healing. There's a gentleman by the name of Brian. I don't know his last name off the top of my head. Yeah, Hoyer. But that's Brian Hoyer. Yeah, so Shielded Healing is pretty good in the space and well versed. And Dr. Joseph Mercola kind of told me about him. We haven't connected yet and had him on the podcast, but I'd like to at some point. It's one of those things where unless you really have the equipment and you've been doing this for years, I would highly recommend not trying to do it yourself, because at least on the building side, because I have been doing it for years and I do have equipment, and I know that it would be a mistake for me to try to do it. I'd be in over my head. And you want more sensitive equipment than, an ENV RD10 meter, which works, but it just tells you if it's bad or if it's okay. It doesn't tell you if your home is not properly grounding and allowing voltage to disperse from your body and things like that.
Exactly.
Or if, and there's stories about people who will set up bed canopies, right? They'll be living in a high rise, so they'll get themselves a silver lined bed canopy, but they won't remember to put something down on the floor. And then what happens is they create this situation where you're getting
it comes in from the bottom
and then reflecting back down onto you. So you're actually getting hit twice. So that's just one example to hopefully impart the importance upon our listeners of engaging an expert, finding someone who's certified by the Building Biology Institute, or a company like Shielded Healing in doing this. So suppresses melatonin, jacking up your sleep, recovery, your cognitive performance, and all things that sleep is good for. This exposure to this electrical radiation does the opposite. We talked about cancer. We talked about diabetes. We've talked about accelerating aging and potentially even shorter telomeres from accelerated cell replication, anxiety, depression. What can we do about it?
Well, cut your exposure. But and you and I were chatting before the recording, and you were saying something that I also have a lot of experience with. When you first talk to people, like when you're talking to people and this is their first, they're really hearing about it, the first they're engaging with this information, you often see people become just hands up, I give up, overwhelmed. Like, well, okay, what am I supposed to do about it? This stuff is everywhere. So there's one characteristic of EMF that I really like teaching people because I think it's super important. And that is the power of EMF radiation diminishes exponentially with distance. So for just as an example, if you, and here I happen to have one here. It's not on, but I have one. If you have a cell phone and it is, an inch away from your body, and then you take it and now put it 2 inches away from your body, the power of your exposure was just cut by 75%. So for many people, this isn't universally true, but for many people, even if you live in an apartment building and you can pick up, dozens of Wi-Fi networks, and you look out the window and you see 5 cell towers, for many of those people, even with all of those exposures, it is often the technology that is closest to them and most in their control that is the biggest source of their personal exposures. So while you can't get rid of all EMF from the environment without taking really drastic life action and moving to the middle of nowhere, right? You can make massive differences in your own personal exposure and thus your own personal health risk from this force. And so cell phones, in fact, I just used that example of the proximity of the cell phone to your body. For a lot of people, and I don't know, this might not be true for your listeners, but for a lot of people, carrying their phone in their pocket or in their bra or in their breast pocket in some way directly against their body is often going to be one of the biggest, if not the single biggest exposure in their lives. And again, that's even with all of these, tech around you, Wi-Fi networks, cell towers. And it's because these cell phones, they are super powerful. They are designed to transmit signals that can go for miles. And when you're holding it right up against your body, you are getting a full dose of that thing, and generally for extended periods of time. So if there's one change that people can make, I strongly encourage it to be that. Don't carry your phone in your pocket or your bra. Or if you do, put it into airplane mode while you're carrying it. Now, you won't send and receive data or messages or calls when you're in airplane mode, but that's fine. People need to get less of that stuff in their lives anyway for a whole bunch of other reasons in terms of what science is showing us about anxiety levels and focus and so on and so forth.
The myth of multitasking.
So that's exactly. It's our relationship with technology. I focus a lot on EMF, but our relationship with technology has gotten to the point where more and more and more people, this is completely non-controversial to say something like, I need to use my cell phone less, because more and more and more people realize that all of our relationships with all of the various technology in our lives has just gotten to this point where it's just not always healthy, and they are willing to be open to and receptive to that type of messaging. But again, back to EMF in particular, we have the phones in pockets, or bra. That is the number one thing that I tell people. The number two, now you mentioned, for instance, in your home, you got rid of Wi-Fi and replaced it with Ethernet, which is a fantastic thing to do. But, I know from dealing with consumers all the time that a lot of people aren't willing to take that step, or they live in a place where they're not even in control of it. They can't lay fiber optic cables in the walls and so forth. So the thing I recommend those people do is turning off Wi-Fi at night when you are sleeping and not even making use of the Wi-Fi. When people try that tip, a huge number of them email me, within 2 or 3 days saying they see right away what a difference it makes. Like, that's not one of these things where you have to take on faith that your health risk is going down. You actually see it in your sleep quality almost instantly when you turn off your Wi-Fi at night. So those are two really actionable big difference makers that I strongly encourage people to do. Now, beyond that, a lot of people will.
One quick thing that I'd like to add on that.
Yeah.
So a lot of our coaching clients and people in our community use the Oura Ring for tracking their sleep and quantifying some of their biometrics. And of course, in airplane mode, they basically wear it in airplane mode. It still captures all of your data, and then you only take it out of airplane mode to update and get the your sleep scores and how much deep sleep you got, how much REM sleep you got, and along with the perceptible energetic, cognitive, sleep-related benefits that come from unplugging Wi-Fi at night, we also see tangible, trackable, measurable improvements in sleep scores, particularly deep and or REM sleep. So that for many people, I know some people that joke and they'll say like, I don't notice anything from anything. They're just like, no matter what they try, they don't really notice too much, whether that's supplements or lifestyle changes. And when you can see an improvement in your sleep scores, for many of those types of folks, it helps make it real and like, oh wow, this has been sort of like a kryptonite under my bed that I didn't even know was there. And in this case, they're Superman.
No, I'm glad you brought that up.
Or Superwoman.
We actually had a guest on my Healthier Tech podcast season, this season, who runs a detox retreat in Indonesia. And he talked about when he used his Oura Ring, and he talked about when he started turning off his Wi-Fi at night, he got 15 minutes more deep sleep consistently every night. And he'd been able to determine that with precision because of his Oura Ring, which again, as you pointed out, you can use in airplane mode, which is fantastic. There's also some versions of Fitbit that I believe function the same way, where you can actually use the Fitbit in airplane mode to do all your tracking and then just connect it, transfer the data out later. That's how I strongly recommend all of these health trackers be used.
Yeah, me as well. I'm not sure that was proper English, but so we've got phone in me too. Phone in airplane mode. Don't have it on your body. As I mentioned, mine is always in airplane mode. It helps you batch your cell phone communication too, where there's set points during the day where you do it all at once, and then you're back in airplane mode. Your productivity goes up. It improves your focus. You don't have the fatigue and diminished willpower that comes from task switching so much throughout the day. Number two, you said was either replace Wi-Fi with Ethernet or at a minimum turn off Wi-Fi at night, which is something everyone can do. And what else? Where should we be focusing our energy?
Well, another big one is I'll do that one and then go back to what I was saying before, is to not sleep with your phone. So again, if a lot of people, this is a habit that a lot of people have. You shouldn't sleep with your phone, or if you do, at least put it in, again, like with the Pocket, put it into airplane mode. And I want people to understand, when your device, your phone or other device is in airplane mode, there's certain functions that won't work, like you can't get a call, but other things do work, right? So you can still use it as an alarm clock if that's your preferred version of an alarm clock. You can still play, Sudoku. Yeah. Even Netflix allows you to download movies and watch them offline. So if you're using it for that reason, so there's a lot of stuff you can still do in airplane mode. It doesn't just turn it into a brick.
Spotify too.
Again, with at night.
Yeah. My favorite Spotify playlists, I downloaded them so I could put my phone in airplane mode and still play them. I've got a cord in my car and I just plug in the phone and I can play music. You plug in the GPS directions and you've got your music going, you've got your directions going, but your phone is in airplane mode, not looking for every tower as you drive on wherever you're going.
That's great. Yeah, because when you're driving or in motion, if you're in a train or in a bus or in a car, your phone is actually emitting, like you were just getting at, is emitting more information because it's constantly having to scan for new towers to connect to. So when you're in transit, just like when you have low reception, poor reception, your phone is actually emitting more of this stuff than it does when you're standing still with good reception. But yeah, turning your phone. I mean,
sorry, if you're getting value from this episode, share it up. I mean, this is something that everyone needs to know, and there's so much misconception and misinformation around it. It's send it to your friends, family members, people that you work with, and tell them to give it a listen. And I think it will change a lot of lives. I want to just mention that there. Sorry to cut you off. Please continue.
No, I appreciate that. I'll give you one more what I call these healthier living tips, which are ways to cut your EMF exposure. And this one is really important, which is not to use AirPods or Bluetooth headsets. Because anything Bluetooth, it's the same type of radiation as Wi-Fi. It's lower powered usually than Wi-Fi because the signals don't have to travel as far. But when you're talking about like AirPods, you're putting it right in your ear, which is very obviously proximal to your brain, also very proximal to your eye, but it's also in a part of your head that has no skull to serve as any kind of natural shield between the source and your brain. And you tend to see people using these for extended periods of time. They don't just put AirPods in for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. They put them in for extended periods of time. So these exposures are in a really bad place, and they're for a very long period of time, and you just don't want that. That's one of these examples where there's no safer way of using AirPods, right? Like with cell phones, there's safer ways of using them and less safe ways of using them. With AirPods, there is no safer way to use them because they have to go in your head. And so it's one of these devices where I strongly recommend that people not use these products. And instead use wired headphones or anti-radiation wired headphones to listen to your music or to do your calls or whatever you're doing on your phone.
Yeah, anti-radiation wired headphones. That's interesting. What are you talking about? Like air tube headphones?
Yeah. So I actually have. Give me one. Sorry, I forgot.
Yeah, cool.
Because I do have air tubes. So just so people understand what we're talking about with air tubes, these are headphones where the standard wire, right, at a certain point gets converted into air. And because it just has air in the tube, that's how it gets the name air tube. It doesn't conduct radiation, which normal wire does. So that's where air tubes get their name. They're great. They stop radiation, which is why I sell my own brand of them. But they don't sound, even the best ones don't sound very good because you're converting the sound to air. So for instance, with mine, I use them for calls and to listen to podcasts. And that's about it. I certainly won't listen to music with them. I don't even enjoy playing games with them or anything like that. But that's why we have this product, which we call the HARD, Headset Anti-Radiation Device. And what this allows you to do is use any pair of headphones. So you can use your like super expensive Bose or whatever you want, and then plug it into your device, whether it's a phone, a tablet, a laptop. And what's in here is a little pack of dielectric gel that filters out the radiation that would otherwise be conducted up your headset cord. So this serves the same purpose as air tubes, but not only does it sound great, it actually improves the sound quality. And what's really interesting to me about this product is it was developed not as radiation protection, but as a sound enhancer, right? Because when you filter out all that stray radiation that would otherwise come up the cord, that radiation is interference. And so when you filter it out, you actually get better sound quality. So this is the HARD, which is also on my website at shieldyourbody.com. And we're the only ones that in the world that sell that.
That's really cool. I'm not familiar with that. So HARD is headset anti-radiation device.
Yes.
Very cool. And all of that is available at shieldyourbody.com. Yeah, I'm gonna pick up one of those and maybe even another pair of.
Just shoot me your after this. Just shoot me your shipping address. I'll get you one.
Oh, thank you. That'd be awesome. Yeah. I've had a number of pairs of AirTube headphones and had a break and, not necessarily hold up or work that well. But yeah, that's cool. I want to make sure to get a good pair, and you covered all of my questions there. So to recap, phone in airplane mode, don't put it on your body. I've also talked to a number of people who feel that they sleep better even with their phone in airplane mode. If you were to compare leaving their phone outside of the bedroom, even in airplane mode, versus having it in the bedroom in airplane mode, I know a number of people who feel like they don't sleep as good even with it in airplane mode if it's in the bedroom.
There's actually science into that now. I don't have it off the top of my head, unfortunately. But there is science into actually keeping your phone. If you compare sleeping with your phone but in airplane mode versus keeping your phone out of the bedroom, that your sleep is better with the phone out of the bedroom. And it has to do with your emotional and psychological relationship with your phone, this constant anticipation of dopamine release from notifications, things like that. And so I don't have that science handy, but I have been reading that lately. So there's actually science behind what you were just explaining.
That's good to know. Yeah, I mean, so we've had Dr. Joseph Mercola on the podcast, and he wrote the book EMF'd that does a pretty good job summarizing a good amount of the scientific literature. And I want to give a shout out to Nick Pineault, Pineault, who wrote the Non-Tinfoil Guide to EMFs, who's also been a guest on the podcast, because those guys both did a lot to help spread awareness in this area and to empower people with some of the scientific literature that supports their recommendations.
Yeah, no, they're both really great.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think is worth mentioning here for people that are still kind of on the fence, like the title that Dr. Joseph Mercola had before he settled in on EMF was EMF Extinction, because he believes that people who do not take into account the real world impact that this technology has on our biology may not be long this world, and certainly are going to find themselves cutting their lives short to such a degree that there may even be an extinction event where you got people that are savvy to it and have made the necessary adjustments, and people that just do what the television tells them and want, I want faster connection. I want more of this stuff. And, I want to bathe in it all day long. So I just wanted to mention that, that's where a lot of the forward thinkers in this arena that are also heavily steeped in the science, where some of their mentality is with regard to its dangers and potential consequences.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think part of that speaks to, and personally, I view that humanity is facing extinction with much higher probability from multiple other causes before EMF. My work in raising awareness is so that people can improve their personal health and their personal ability to enjoy life. But when you talk about something like that devastating potential that you were just referencing, I think part of what that gets at is just how intertwined the technology is that exposes us to these forces with our modern society. And so it would be much easier today to stop the next generation of cell phone network and to stop turning everything in our home into something smart than it will be in 10 years to undo that next generation of cell phone network. Yeah. Or to undo the grids that connect all of our cars and devices and make them work, right? This is what, because the devices that emit these forces into our world are so fundamentally intertwined into our society that actually undoing that is going to be incredibly challenging and will involve real economic cost and possible social disruption to services and products that we've all come to kind of rely on. And that's why it's much easier to stop it in the first place than it is to undo it later on. And, I'll compare that with the example of smoking, which, a lot of people compare EMF to tobacco and to cigarettes. And there are certainly some similarities. But the fact is,
it's much worse.
You could ban all tobacco on the planet tomorrow, and while a few companies would go out of business, that would be the extent of the damage, right? You can't get rid of EMF. And the more and more and more of infrastructure, EMF emitting infrastructure that you put into place, the harder and harder and harder it becomes to reduce that exposure. And so if in 20 years we find out that certain things were a lot more dangerous than even someone like I was going around saying, we're in a tough spot, because what are you going to do? Because you'd have to really kind of perform surgery on the entire modern economy and society in order to try to undo that damage. And so I that part of what you were just talking about, I think it is important for people to understand. There's something that my father talked about a lot, and we talk a lot. We spend a whole chapter on in Overpowered, and it's called the precautionary principle. And that is, when the potential for harm is so significant, then it's better to be safe than sorry. And that's what we are seeing with EMF, right? That the scientific indicators are such where there is a lot of reason to be concerned about the possible harm. And when you see that level of flashing red warning, you shouldn't, the standard of action should not be conclusive proof, but in order for you to take action. And that's what he believed should be applied to the EMF issue. And that's what I believe should be applied to the EMF issue. But I also want to underscore that this is a decision every individual person can take. Yes, I believe EMF safety standards should be significantly strengthened, but I also believe that that takes a lot of work from a lot of people, and you can actually make those differences in your life right now. And that is really the lesson that I like people taking home after they've listened to me spout off for an hour.
I like it. And as a general rule of thumb, if something is called smart, if there's smart in the name, you want nothing to do with it. And it shouldn't be in your house. You're either bugging your home or exposing yourself to these harmful frequencies. And two quick resources, or just one rather, buildingbiologyinstitute.org. That's where you could also go to find an expert and someone that could help you with this stuff, where you can get a reading on your home, or you can engage them to help you with a build. So buildingbiologyinstitute.org. This has been a fantastic conversation. Is there we've got shieldyourbody.com, where you've got some of your resources and products that people could buy. You've got the Healthier Tech podcast. Where else can people stay up to date on things you're working on and then that sort of thing?
Sure. Yeah. So, you mentioned the website, and I thank you very much for that. I'd also just say to people, right at the top there of my homepage, you can get, I write a lot of ebooks, but my main one, which has the top 5 things that you can do to cut your personal exposure. And then I also, in that book, explain why I believe those are the top 5. So it's not just like the 5 things I picked out of the top of my head. In terms of where else people can follow me, YouTube is actually a great place to follow me and Shield Your Body. We have a lot of great content up on YouTube, and that's youtube.com/shieldYourBody. So shieldYourBody.com and then youtube.com/shieldYourBody. And you can also find my podcast on my website, and that's the Healthier Podcast.
Guys, share this episode up, get it out to people, help us spread this information. R. Blank, thank you so much for your time and wisdom. Appreciate having you on.
Thank you so much, Anthony. I really enjoyed this conversation. I look forward to doing it again sometime.